I wanted to tell my daughter that I had inherited a villa on the oceanfront and 2 apartments in San Diego. I was returning from the notary in a good mood, eager to share the news that would save us from financial ruin. But when I approached the house, I heard their voices through the window. What I heard next made me freeze in horror. My son-in-law was not planning a celebration. He was planning my funeral. If you have ever felt the cold knife of betrayal from your own family, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel if you believe that respect is more important than money. My name is Harrison Bennett. I am 70 years old, and this is the story of how I escaped a death trap set by my own flesh and blood. Let me know in the comments which city you are listening from, and let's begin. The Chicago wind has a way of cutting right through you, especially in November. It finds the gaps in your scarf and settles in your bones. But that afternoon, I did not feel the cold. I sat on the bus clutching a thick manila envelope against my chest, as if it were a newborn baby. Inside that envelope was a deed to a villa in Malibu and the keys to a new life. My brother Lucas, the one everyone called the black sheep of the family, had passed away quietly in California. We had not spoken in years, but in his final act he remembered me. $12 million in assets. That was the number the lawyer Mr. Kavanaugh had whispered to me. I looked out the bus window at the gray streets of my neighborhood. For the last 3 years, I had been living in a converted storage room in my daughter Tiffany's house. I had sold my own home, the home where I raised her, to pay off her husband Brad's gambling debts. I thought I was being a good father. I thought family helps family. In return, they gave me a mattress on the floor and a list of chores. But today, everything was going to change. I wasn't just the old man who needed a ride to the clinic anymore. I was Harrison Bennett, the millionaire. I imagined the look on Tiffany's face. She would cry. She would hug me. Maybe she would finally apologize for the way she snapped at me when I coughed too loudly. I imagined Brad, that lazy car salesman, finally showing me some respect. I was ready to forgive them. I was ready to share it all. I decided I would give them half. $6 million. It would clear their debts, buy them a real house, and maybe, just maybe, buy me some peace. The bus hissed to a stop at the corner. I stepped off my knees, aching a little less than usual. Hope is a powerful painkiller. I walked the 2 blocks to the small, peeling house. The lights were on in the kitchen. I could see their shadows moving against the blinds. I smiled to myself. I decided not to use my key. I wanted to ring the doorbell like a guest. I wanted to see their faces when I told them to pack their bags, because we were moving to the beach. I stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under my boots. I reached for the doorbell, but then I stopped. I heard laughter. It was a loud, raucous laugh. It was Brad. I stopped because I hadn't heard Brad laugh like that in months. Usually he was screaming at the television or complaining about his commission checks. Curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what they were happy about. Maybe Brad had finally sold a car. Maybe things were looking up even without my help. I leaned in closer to the window, just a few inches from the glass. The laughter died down, replaced by the clinking of beer bottles. "You know, babe," Brad said, his voice slurring slightly. I ran the numbers again. If the old man kicks the bucket before the new year, the payout covers everything. The house, the car, even my bookie. My hand froze in midair. My heart missed a beat. He was talking about my life insurance. It was a small policy I had kept for 30 years, intended to cover my burial costs, so they wouldn't be burdened. Tiffany's voice floated out next. It was calm. Too calm. "That is the only problem, Brad. He is healthy as a horse. The doctor said his heart condition is stable as long as he takes his medication. He could live another 10 years. We can't wait 10 years. We are drowning now." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, colder than the Chicago wind. They were discussing my death as if it were a business transaction. I expected Tiffany to defend me. I expected her to tell him to stop talking like that. I waited. Instead, I heard her sigh. I have been looking into that state facility. The one on 5th Street. You know, the one they investigated last year for neglect. It is free if you are indigent. We could dump him there. Tell the neighbors he needed specialized care. We can rent out his room for $800 a month. That covers the car lease. My knees nearly gave out. The facility on 5th Street. Everyone knew that place. It was where people went to die alone, lying in their own filth. My daughter, the girl I carried on my shoulders, the girl whose college tuition I paid by working double shifts in construction, wanted to put me in a warehouse for $800 a month. But it was what Brad said next that made the world stop spinning. $800 is pocket change, Tiff. We need the insurance lump sum. And I am tired of waiting for nature to take its course. I heard the sound of a pill bottle rattling, the distinct sound of plastic against plastic. I picked up his prescription today, Brad whispered. But I didn't just pick it up. I stopped by the pharmacy and bought a bottle of vitamin C. They look exactly the same. White, round little pills. There was a silence in the kitchen. A silence that stretched on for an eternity. I pressed my ear against the cold glass, praying I was misunderstanding, praying this was a sick joke. So Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You swapped them. I swapped them, Brad replied, sounding proud of himself. He has been taking sugar pills since Tuesday. The next time his chest tightens, he will reach for his medicine, and it won't do a damn thing. One good shock, one stressful moment, and boom, problem solved, payout secured. I staggered back from the window. The envelope in my jacket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I gasped for air, clutching my chest. The irony was cruel. My chest was tightening right now. Panic was setting in. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Was the pill I took this morning real, or was it just a vitamin? I looked at the front door. The wood was peeling, the paint was chipped. Behind that door were the two people I loved most in the world. And they were murderers. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively killing me. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking violently. I had $12 million in my pocket. I had the power to change their lives. I had the power to save them. But they didn't want to be saved. They wanted to cash me in like a scrap car. I couldn't go in there. If I walked through that door, if I showed them the money, I would never make it out alive. If they were willing to kill me for a $50,000 insurance policy, what would they do for $12 million? They would suffocate me in my sleep. They would push me down the stairs. I had to get away. I had to think. I stepped off the porch, careful not to make the wood creak. I backed away down the driveway, my eyes fixed on that glowing kitchen window. I saw Brad's shadow raise a beer bottle in a toast. They were toasting to my death. I turned and walked. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked into the cold, darkening street. The wind bit at my face, but I welcomed it. It told me I was still alive. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small pill case I kept for emergencies. I stared at the little white tablet inside. Was this my salvation? Or was it the weapon that would end me? I couldn't trust it. I couldn't trust anything anymore. I needed help. But I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. I had no proof. Just the word of an old man against a young couple. They would say I was senile. They would say I was confused. Tiffany was good at playing the victim. I needed someone smarter than them. I needed someone who knew how to fight dirty. I stopped under a street lamp and pulled out the business card the lawyer had given me. Mr. Kavanaugh. He had looked at me with steel-gray eyes and said, Mr. Bennett, money changes people. Be careful who you tell. He knew. Somehow he knew. I walked to the nearest bus stop. I wasn't going home tonight. I wasn't going to die tonight. I was going to survive. And then I was going to teach them a lesson they would never forget. As the bus headlights cut through the darkness, a new feeling replaced the fear. It was anger. Cold, hard anger. They thought I was a helpless old man. They thought I was a burden. They were about to find out that Harrison Bennett was not done yet. I boarded the bus, leaving the house and my former life behind. I didn't look back. The war had begun, and they didn't even know they were fighting it. I stood on the porch for a full minute, trying to regulate my breathing. My heart was still hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I forced my lungs to expand and contract slowly. I reached inside my jacket and felt the thick envelope one last time. It was my shield. It was my weapon. I slid it carefully into the hidden pocket of my inner lining, right next to my chest. If they hugged me, they might feel the stiff paper, so I had to be careful. I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand and pasted a smile on my face. It was the hardest acting performance of my life. I was about to walk into a lion's den armed only with a secret. I pushed the front door open. The warmth of the house hit me immediately, but it felt artificial and suffocating. The smell of roasted garlic and seared meat filled the air, making my empty stomach growl violently. Brad was sitting at the kitchen island nursing a bottle of beer. As soon as he saw me, his face transformed. It was terrifying to watch. One second he was scowling at his phone, and the next second his features rearranged themselves into a mask of welcoming warmth. It was like watching a snake shed its skin. "Hey, Dad," he called out, his voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. "We were just wondering where you were. We were getting worried sick about you out in this cold." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. I locked it, not to keep intruders out, but because I knew I was locked in with the real danger. "I am sorry," I said, keeping my voice raspy and weak. "I got confused about the bus schedule. My head has been a little foggy today." I saw Brad exchange a quick look with Tiffany, a look of triumph. They thought the medication swap was already working. They thought my mind was going. Tiffany rushed over from the stove. She was wearing an apron over her designer blouse, the one I had paid for with my Social Security checks 3 months ago. She didn't hug me. She just patted my arm with a touch that felt more like a frisk than a caress. "You are late, Daddy," she chided gently. "You know you should not be out in this weather. Your heart is fragile. Come sit down. Dinner is ready." I sat down at my usual spot at the end of the table. It was the wobbly chair, the one with the uneven leg that they kept meaning to fix, but never did. I watched as Tiffany plated the food. She placed a bowl in front of me. It was vegetable broth, pale, watery, and lukewarm, with a few floating pieces of overcooked carrot. Then she served Brad. A thick, juicy ribeye steak landed on his plate with a heavy thud, sizzling and releasing a cloud of savory steam. Beside it sat a mound of buttery mashed potatoes. She served herself a smaller steak and a glass of red wine. I looked at my bowl, then at their plates. Usually I would not say anything. I was just grateful to be fed. I was a guest in their home after all. But tonight, the disparity felt like a physical slap in the face. The smell of the steak was intoxicating, but the smell of their betrayal was stronger. "The doctor said heavy proteins are bad for your digestion," Dad, Tiffany said, catching my eye. "We are just looking out for you. Your system is slowing down. You need things that are easy to process." I nodded slowly, dipping my spoon into the gray liquid. "Thank you, Pumpkin," I said, using the nickname I hadn't used in years. It tasted like ash in my mouth. Brad sliced into his steak, the red juice running onto the white ceramic. He chewed slowly, watching me with eyes that were too alert. He looked like a predator toying with a wounded mouse. "So Harrison," Brad said, wiping grease from his lip. "Did you go to the library today?" I kept my hand shaking as I lifted the spoon. "Yes. I just sat and read the newspaper. I fell asleep in the chair, actually." Good," Brad said. You need your rest. Halfway through the meal, Tiffany cleared her throat. The sound was sharp in the quiet kitchen. She reached under the placemat and pulled out a crisp white document. It was stapled neatly at the corner. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said casually, trying to sound like it was an afterthought. "Dad, we need to handle some boring paperwork. Since your memory has been slipping lately, Brad and I think it is time we help you manage your pension checks." She slid the paper across the table along with a pen. It moved across the smooth wood and stopped right next to my bowl of soup. I looked down at the bold letters at the top. General Durable Power of Attorney. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty window. I had worked in construction for 40 years. I dealt with contracts, permits, and legal documents. I knew exactly what this was. This wasn't just about helping me with checks. This gave them total control. If I signed this, they could sell my assets. They could access my medical records. They could empty my bank accounts. And most importantly, they could sign a do not resuscitate order on my behalf. If I signed this paper, I was handing them the weapon to kill me legally. "Just sign at the bottom," Brad said, his mouth full of steak. "It saves us the hassle of running to the bank for you every week. You are 70 now, Harrison. Let us take the burden off your shoulders. We just want you to relax and enjoy your golden years." His voice was casual, but his hand was gripping the steak knife so hard his knuckles were white. The air in the kitchen grew heavy. They had stopped eating. Both of them were staring at me, waiting. I looked at the pen. I looked at the paper. If I refused outright, they would know I was suspicious. They might panic. They might realize I knew about the pills. If they thought their plan was compromised, they might do something violent right here in the kitchen. I wasn't strong enough to fight Brad. I needed time. I needed to get to Mr. Kavanaugh tomorrow morning. I just needed to survive the night. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling. This time, I didn't have to fake the tremors. I was genuinely terrified. I brought the pen close to the paper. Brad leaned forward, his eyes hungry. Tiffany stopped breathing. They were like vultures waiting for the animal to stop moving. I moved my hand towards the signature line. I saw Brad's lips curl into a smirk. He thought he had won. He thought the old fool was signing his life away. Then I let my elbow spasm. Just a sudden, violent jerk. My arm hit the bowl of soup. The bowl tipped over with a loud clatter. The lukewarm broth flooded across the table. It soaked the placemat. It soaked the tablecloth. And it completely drenched the document. The white paper turned translucent and soggy instantly, the ink beginning to bleed into a gray mess. "Oh no," I cried out, dropping the pen. "I am so clumsy. Look what I did." I tried to wipe it with my napkin, only making it worse, tearing the wet paper. "I am so sorry." My hand just jerked. The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany shrieked and jumped back to avoid the splash. But I was watching Brad. He didn't jump. He didn't move. He just stared at the ruined paper, and then he looked up at me. The mask was gone. There was no fake smile. There was no concern for his father-in-law. There was only cold, pure hatred. His eyes were dark pits. For a second I thought he was going to lunge across the table and strangle me right there. I saw the veins in his neck bulge. "It is okay," Brad said. His voice was a low growl that vibrated in his chest. "Accidents happen." He stood up slowly. He walked around the table and stood behind me. I could feel his heat. I could feel the threat radiating off him. "We will print another one," he whispered near my ear. "You can sign it first thing tomorrow morning. Before breakfast. Do not worry, Dad. We have plenty of paper." He stepped back and looked at Tiffany. "Clean this up. Send him to his room. Before he breaks anything else." I stood up, clutching my chest. I didn't have to act. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might give out for real. "I am sorry," I whispered again. "I will go to bed." I shuffled out of the kitchen, feeling Brad's eyes drilling into my back. I had bought myself 12 hours. But as I walked down the dark hallway to my room, I knew one thing for certain. Tonight was going to be the longest night of my life, and if I closed my eyes, I might never open them again. My room was not really a room. It was a renovated storage space at the back of the house near the laundry area. There was no heating vent in there, so the Chicago winter seeped through the thin drywall, turning the air into ice. Usually, I would shiver under my thin wool blanket, praying for morning to come. But that night, the cold was the last thing on my mind. I lay on the narrow twin mattress, fully dressed in my thermal pajamas and my heavy socks, staring blindly into the darkness. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every creak of the settling house sounded like a footstep. I was exhausted, my body screaming for rest, but my mind was wide alert, fueled by a potent mixture of adrenaline and terror. I knew I could not close my eyes. If I slept, I might never wake up. I kept my hand pressed against my chest, feeling the steady rhythm of my heart. It was a strong heart despite what the doctors said. It had weathered 70 years of hard labor, the loss of my wife, and the slow, heartbreaking erosion of my relationship with my daughter. But now it felt fragile. It felt like a ticking clock. I thought about the envelope hidden inside my coat, which I had tucked under my pillow. $12 million. It was enough money to buy this entire neighborhood, yet here I was, cowering in a freezing closet, afraid of my own son-in-law. Around 2 a.m, the silence of the house was broken. It was faint at first, just the soft groan of a floorboard in the hallway. I knew that sound. It was the loose board right outside the bathroom. Someone was up. I stiffened, pulling the blanket up to my chin. I turned my head slightly towards the door, narrowing my eyes to slits. I had to look like I was asleep. I had to look like the helpless, clueless old man they thought I was. The doorknob turned. It was a slow, agonizing rotation. The latch clicked quietly and the door drifted open an inch. A slice of yellow light from the hallway cut across the floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I forced my breathing to become deep and rhythmic. In 1, 2, 3, out 1, 2, 3. I even added a small soft snore at the end of the exhale, just like I used to do when I napped in front of the television. A figure slipped into the room. Even in the dim light, I recognized the silhouette. It was Brad. He was moving with a stealth I didn't know he possessed. Usually he stomped around the house like he owned the world. But tonight, he was a thief in the night. He smelled of stale beer and that musky, overpowering cologne he wore to hide the scent of cigarettes. He crept towards the small nightstand beside my bed. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was terrified he could hear it. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a drum in the silent room. I willed it to slow down. Please, I begged my body, do not betray me now. Brad stopped right beside my head. I could feel his body heat. I could hear his shallow breathing. He was standing over me, watching me. I kept my eyes shut tight, my body limp. It took every ounce of willpower not to flinch, not to open my eyes and scream. I felt like a prey animal playing dead while the predator sniffed at its neck. Then I heard it. The soft click of a plastic bottle being lifted from the wooden surface. It was my heart medication. Isosorbide mononitrate. The pills that kept my arteries open and my blood flowing. There was a pause, then a soft rattle, and then another click as a bottle was placed back down. He did not just take the medicine, he swapped it, just like he said he would. He stood there for another moment. I felt a shift in the air as he leaned closer. His face must have been inches from mine. I could hear him swallow. Was he checking to see if I was breathing? Was he debating whether to use a pillow to speed things up? My lungs burned with the need for oxygen, but I kept my rhythm steady. Snore, exhale, wait. Finally, he straightened up. I heard the soft shuffle of his slippers on the linoleum. He walked back to the door, slipped out, and closed it with a soft click. The moment the latch engaged, I gasped. I sucked in air greedily, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging. It is one thing to hear a threat. It is another thing entirely to have the weapon placed beside your head while you sleep. They had really done it. They had crossed the line from ungrateful children to cold-blooded killers. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I lay there watching the slice of moonlight move across the floor, counting the minutes until sunrise. I felt a profound loneliness. The daughter I had raised, the girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, was sleeping soundly upstairs, while her husband planted a death trap in my room. The grief was heavier than the fear. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the small high window, I sat up. My joints were stiff, my back ached, but my mind was crystal clear. I reached for the pill bottle on the nightstand. It looked exactly the same. Same orange plastic. Same white cap. Even the label looked similar at a glance. But when I brought it closer to the weak morning light, I saw the difference. The label was slightly crooked. It was a generic label printed from a home computer taped over the original. It said, Harrison Bennett, 20 milligrams. But inside were not my life-saving tablets. Inside were cheap drugstore vitamins. I unscrewed the cap and poured a pill into my palm. It was white and round, just like my medicine, but it lacked the small imprinted code numbers. If I had a heart attack and reached for this, I would be dead in minutes. I squeezed the pill in my hand until it crumbled into powder. They expect me to walk into the kitchen this morning, I whispered to the empty room. They expect me to apologize for the soup. They expect me to sign the power of attorney and then wait to die. I looked at the digital clock. 5:45 a.m. Brad never woke up before 9. Tiffany was usually up by 7. I had a window of opportunity. I realized then that I could not stay and fight from the inside. I could not pretend to be senile anymore. If I stayed, I would have to eat their food, drink their water, and live under their roof. Every moment would be a gamble with my life. I needed to be where they could not reach me. I needed to be on offense, not defense. I threw off the covers. I did not pack a suitcase. A suitcase would be too loud and too cumbersome. I only took what was essential. I grabbed my heavy wool coat, the one with the frayed collar. I put on my sturdy work boots, tying the laces tight. I went to the loose floorboard in the corner where I kept my emergency cash stashed inside an old sock. $80. It was not much, but it was enough for a taxi. I retrieved the envelope from under my pillow and placed it back in the hidden pocket of my coat. I patted it once. My freedom. I looked at the bedroom door. If I opened it, the hallway floorboards might creak. The front door had a sticky lock that always snapped loudly. I couldn't risk it. I turned to the window. It was small, high up, and hadn't been opened in years. I dragged the nightstand over to the wall. I climbed onto it, my knees protesting with sharp stabs of pain. I unlocked the latch. It was painted shut. "Come on," I gritted my teeth, pushing against the frame. "Come on, you old stubborn thing." I pushed harder, channeling all my anger, all my betrayal into my arms. With a sudden crack, the paint seal broke and the window slid upward. A blast of freezing air hit my face, stinging my eyes. It smelled of wet pavement and freedom. I didn't hesitate. I hoisted myself up, wriggling my torso through the opening. The rough siding scraped my stomach through my pajamas. I was 70 years old, climbing out of a window like a rebellious teenager. It was absurd. It was desperate. And it was necessary. I lowered myself down on the other side, my boots hitting the frozen grass of the backyard with a soft thud. I crouched low, waiting to see if a light would flick on upstairs. The house remained dark and silent, a tomb for the living. I stood up and pulled my collar tight around my neck. I looked back at the window one last time. I was leaving behind my clothes, my photographs, my past. But I was taking my life back. I walked to the back gate, unlatched it, and stepped into the alleyway. The city was waking up. I could hear the distant hum of traffic. I began to walk faster than I had walked in years. I wasn't just walking away from a house. I was walking towards a war. And this time I was going to be the one setting the trap. The glass doors of the Kavanaugh and Associates building were heavy. They felt like the gates to a fortress against the rest of the world. When I walked into the lobby, the receptionist looked up from her computer with a sharp frown. I knew exactly what she saw. She saw an old man in a dirty coat with mud on his work boots and dark circles under his eyes. She did not see a millionaire client. She saw a nuisance. She saw someone who probably got lost on the way to the soup kitchen. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice dripping with that polite condescension I had grown so used to over the last few years. "I am here to see Mr. Kavanaugh," I said, my voice raspy from the cold air. "He is fully booked today," she replied instantly, her hand hovering over the security button. But before she could dismiss me, the double mahogany doors behind her swung open. Mr. Kavanaugh stepped out. He was a man who wore three-piece suits like armor and carried himself with the authority of a general. When he saw me, his expression did not change to disgust or confusion. It softened into genuine concern. He waved the receptionist away with a sharp flick of his hand and ushered me into his private office. The smell of old books, expensive leather, and strong coffee was the first real comfort I had felt in 24 hours. It smelled like safety. Mr. Kavanaugh guided me to a wingback chair and poured me a cup of black coffee from a silver carafe. He did not ask questions immediately. He waited until my shaking hands could hold the cup steady. He waited until the color returned to my face. Then he sat behind his massive desk and folded his hands. "Tell me, Harrison," he said softly. "Why are you here so early?" "We were not scheduled to meet until the reading of the will next week." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the plastic bottle. I placed it on the polished wood surface. The sound it made was small, but the weight of it in the room was enormous. I told him everything. I told him about the conversation I heard through the window. I told him about the soup and the forced power of attorney document. I told him about Brad creeping into my freezing room like a specter in the night. I told him how I had climbed out of a window, like a fugitive leaving behind the only home I had left. Mr. Kavanaugh listened in silence. He did not take notes. He did not interrupt. He just watched me with those steel gray eyes that seemed to see right through to my soul. When I finished, I pushed the bottle towards him. He picked it up. He opened it and poured a single white pill into his palm. He examined it under the bright light of his desk lamp. Then his hand closed into a fist so tight I saw the tendons pop. He was a man of the law, a man of control, but in that moment I saw pure, unadulterated rage. "This is not just greed, Harrison," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is attempted murder. They are not waiting for you to die. They are hunting you. They swapped a life-saving medication for a placebo. If you had taken this during an episode, you would be dead within the hour." He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the gray Chicago skyline. "We can go to the police," he said. "We have the bottle. We have your testimony. But the law is slow, and these people are slippery. They will claim it was a mistake. They will claim you are confused or that you swapped the pills yourself to frame them. Without video evidence, it is your word against theirs." I slumped in the chair. I felt defeated. "So what do?" I asked. "Do I just run away? Do I let them get away with trying to kill me?" Mr. Kavanaugh turned back to me. A shadow crossed his face, and for the first time he smiled. But it was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who has just spotted a limping deer. "No, Harrison," he said. "We do not run. We fight. But we fight on our terms. You said they want money. You said they are desperate for cash." "Yes," I nodded. "Brad owes money to bookies. Tiffany is drowning in credit card debt." Then we will hit them where it hurts the most, Mr. Kavanaugh said, walking back to his desk. We are going to rewrite the narrative. You did not inherit $12 million. Not yet. I looked at him confused. But the papers... Forget the papers for a moment, he interrupted. Tomorrow I will go to that house. I will act as the executor of your brother's estate. But I will tell them a different story. I will tell them that Lucas Bennett did not die a wealthy tycoon. I will tell them he died bankrupt. I sat up straighter, intrigued. I will tell them, Mr. Kavanaugh continued, his voice picking up speed, that Lucas left behind a massive debt. Let's say $150,000, and I will tell them that under a loophole in the family trust, as his closest living relative, you are liable for that debt. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. This is the ultimate test, Harrison. If they truly care about you, if there is even a shred of humanity left in them, they will stand by you. They will try to help you figure it out. But if they are the monsters I think they are... He let the sentence hang in the air. I knew exactly what he meant. If they thought I came with a debt instead of a fortune, they would reveal their true faces instantly. There would be no more fake smiles, no more steak dinners, no more pretending. But Mr. Kavanaugh, I said, hesitating, if we do this, they will throw me out. They will discard me like trash. That is exactly the point, the lawyer said grimly. We need them to do it. We need them to reject you officially and legally. We need them to sign a document refusing guardianship to avoid the debt. Once they sign that, they sever their legal ties to you. They lose any claim to your future assets. And most importantly, we will record it all. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small black device. It looked like a pen, but I knew it was a high-definition camera. I will wear this, he said. And you, Harrison, you need to be strong. This is going to be theater, but the pain will be real. You will see your daughter look at you with hatred. You will see your son-in-law treat you like a disease. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done. He paused, his expression softening again. I have seen families fight over money for 30 years, Harrison. But I have never seen a case this cold. You need to know the truth. You need to know if there is anything worth saving in that house, or if you need to worsen that bridge to the ground and never look back. I looked at the vitamin bottle on the desk. I thought about the cold wind in the alley. I thought about the laughter in the kitchen when they toasted to my death. I thought about the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders and how she had grown into a woman who would put her father in a state-run facility to save money on a car lease. Mr. Kavanaugh was right. I needed to know. I needed to see the monster in the light of day. I looked Mr. Kavanaugh in the eye and nodded slowly. Do it, I said. Let's see who they really are. Excellent, Mr. Kavanaugh said, pressing a button on his intercom. He looked energized, ready for battle. Martha, cancel my morning appointments and get the car ready. Mr. Bennett and I have a performance to plan. He looked at me one last time. Go to the Hotel Harrison. Rest. Eat a real meal. Because tomorrow morning we are going to walk into hell. And I promise you, we will walk out the winners. I stood up, feeling a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was anticipation. The old Harrison Bennett, the victim, was gone. The new Harrison Bennett was about to play the game of his life, and he held all the aces. I took a cab to the corner of the street just before sunrise. The neighborhood was still asleep, wrapped in a gray blanket of mist. I walked the rest of the way, keeping to the shadows, my heart beating a steady rhythm of determination. I was no longer running away. I was infiltrating enemy territory. I slipped the key into the lock of the back door, the one that led directly into the mudroom near my storage closet. It turned silently, thanks to the graphite powder I had applied to it weeks ago, a habit from my days maintaining job sites. I stepped inside and the smell of the house hit me again. It was the smell of stale air and secrets. I moved quickly. I did not have much time. Brad usually woke up around 9, but Tiffany sometimes got up earlier to check her emails. I went straight to the living room where the main confrontation would likely happen. On the high shelf above the television sat a collection of old toys that Tiffany refused to throw away. Among them was a ragged teddy bear with one missing button eye. It was Mr. Bear, the stuffed animal I had bought her for her 5th birthday. I remembered the day clearly. She had hugged my leg and promised to love him forever. Now Mr. Bear was covered in dust, a relic of a love that had long since evaporated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small wireless camera I had purchased from an electronics store on my way back from the hotel. It was tiny, no bigger than a quarter, with a battery life of 12 hours. My hands were large and calloused hands that had built skyscrapers and poured concrete foundations, but they were steady. I took Mr. Bear down and carefully made a small incision in the fabric behind the remaining glass eye. I nestled the camera inside, positioning the lens so it peeked through the gap in the stitching. It was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. I placed the bear back on the shelf, angling it perfectly to capture the entire living room and the entrance to the kitchen. It was the vantage point of a silent judge. I synchronized the feed to the phone Mr. Kavanaugh had given me. The image on the screen was crisp and clear. I saw the empty sofa, the coffee table cluttered with Brad's beer bottles, and the rug where I'd played with my grandson before they stopped letting me see him. I pocketed the phone and retreated to my room. I took off my heavy coat and boots, hiding them under the mattress. I put on my old, worn-out cardigan and my slippers. I ruffled my hair to look disheveled and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. I had to transform. I had to shrink. I had to become the Harrison they expected, the Harrison they despised. At 8:30, I heard the heavy thud of footsteps upstairs, then the sound of water running in the pipes. They were up. I walked into the kitchen just as Tiffany was starting the coffee machine. She jumped when she saw me spilling water on the counter. "Jesus, Dad," she snapped, wiping the counter aggressively. "You scared me. I thought you were still sleeping. Where were you last night anyway? I knocked on your door and you didn't answer." I slept deeply, I lied, my voice trembling just enough. "I haven't slept that well in years. Must be the new vitamins." Brad walked in, scratching his stomach. He looked hungover, his eyes bloodshot and puffy. He saw me and his face hardened instantly. He didn't say good morning. He went straight to the printer in the home office corner and grabbed a sheet of paper. He marched over to me and slapped it down on the kitchen table. "We are not doing the soup routine again, Harrison," he said, his voice raspy and threatening. "Sit down, sign it, now." It was the fresh power of attorney document. The ink was barely dry. I looked at the paper, then at Brad. The aggression radiating off him was palpable. He was losing patience. He needed that money, and he needed it fast. I need my glasses," I stammered, patting my pockets. "You do not need glasses to sign your name," Brad shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "Just scribble your name on the line. Do not make me ask you again." Tiffany stood by the sink, watching. She didn't intervene. She just sipped her coffee, her eyes cold and detached. "Do it, Dad," she said softly. "Stop being difficult. We have to go to work." I sat down in the chair, my posture slumped. I looked at the pen Brad was shoving in my face. I reached for it, letting my hand shake violently. I brought the pen to the paper. Brad leaned in, his breath smelling of decay. He was practically salivating. I hesitated. I pulled the hand back. "What is it now?" Brad roared. I will sign it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I promise. But not right now." Brad grabbed my collar. I felt his knuckles dig into my neck. "What do you mean, not right now?" I looked up at him, widening my eyes in feigned fear. My brother, Lucas. His lawyer called me yesterday on the landline while you were out. Brad froze. Tiffany put her mug down. What are you talking about? Tiffany asked, stepping closer. What lawyer? Mr. Kavanaugh. I said, inventing the details as I went. He said he is coming over this morning. He said Lucas left something important. He said he needs to read the will to the family before I sign anything legal. He said it involves a lot of assets. I saw the word assets hit them like a drug. Brad released my collar slowly. He smoothed the front of my cardigan, his hands trembling slightly with excitement. Assets, Brad repeated, looking at Tiffany. Did you hear that, babe? Assets. That means money. Tiffany's eyes lit up. How much money, Dad? Did he say? I shook my head. He didn't say. He just said Lucas did very well for himself in California. He said it was substantial. Brad let out a low whistle. He picked up the power of attorney document and folded it, putting it in his pocket. Okay, that is fine. If there is an inheritance coming, we don't need this yet. We need to make sure we get everything Lucas left first. He turned to me, a twisted smile returning to his face. Why didn't you say so sooner, Dad? This is great news. Go put on a clean shirt. You look like a hobo. We need to make a good impression on this lawyer. I stood up, keeping my head down to hide the disgust in my eyes. I will go change, I said. As I walked out of the kitchen, I heard them high-fiving. We are rich, Brad whispered loudly. I told you the old man was a gold mine. We just had to wait. I went back to my room, but I didn't change my shirt. I stood by the door, listening. The house was buzzing with a nervous energy. They were cleaning up frantically, hiding the beer bottles, straightening the cushions. They were preparing the stage for their windfall. They had no idea they were preparing the stage for their execution. I checked the time. 9:59. Mr. Kavanaugh was punctual to the second. I walked back into the living room. I stood under the shelf where Mr. Bear sat watching. I looked at the camera lens for a split second, acknowledging my silent partner. What time is he coming? Brad asked, pacing back and forth. He was wearing a tie now, but it was crooked. Any minute, I said, sitting in the armchair. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Brad was sweating. Tiffany was checking her makeup in the hall mirror for the 10th time. They were greedy children waiting for a piñata to burst open. They had forgotten about the pills. They had forgotten about the nursing home. All they saw were dollar signs. And then it happened. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, clear sound that cut through the silence. Brad jumped. He looked at Tiffany. Showtime, he whispered. He looked at me. Behave yourself, old man. Let us do the talking. I nodded meekly, but inside I was screaming. Yes. Let the talking begin. Brad walked to the door. He adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and swung the door open. I saw Mr. Kavanaugh standing there. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Brad's car. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a cane in the other. He looked every inch the bringer of judgment. Mr. Bennett, Brad said, putting on his best salesman smile. Please come in, we have been expecting you. Mr. Kavanaugh didn't smile. He stepped over the threshold, bringing the cold air with him. He looked at Brad, then at Tiffany, and finally his eyes landed on me. He gave me a microscopic nod. The trap was set. The players were in position, and the curtain was rising on the final act of their deception. I leaned back in my chair and waited for the bomb to drop. Mr. Kavanaugh did not take the seat Brad offered him. Instead, he walked to the center of the living room and stood there like a statue carved from ice. He placed his briefcase on the coffee table, pushing aside a coaster that had a beer stain on it. He did not look at me. He did not look at the hidden camera in the teddy bear. He looked strictly at Brad and Tiffany, with an expression that was professional yet utterly devoid of warmth. I sat in my armchair, clutching my cardigan, feigning the confusion of an old man who does not quite understand what is happening. But inside my mind was razor-sharp, recording every micro-expression on their faces. "I am afraid I have some difficult news regarding your Uncle Lucas, Mr. Kavanaugh," began his voice, deep and baritone, filling the small room. Tiffany immediately clasped her hands over her chest, performing the role of the grieving niece. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He is gone, isn't he? We knew he was sick, but we hoped—" She trailed off, trying to squeeze out a tear that refused to come. Brad was less patient. He stepped forward, his hands in his pockets, jingling his keys nervously. "It is a tragedy. A real tragedy. But, seeing as you are here, Mr. Kavanaugh, I assume we need to discuss the estate. You know the logistics. We want to make sure Harrison here is taken care of." I saw the greed dancing in Brad's eyes. He wasn't thinking about Lucas. He was thinking about the Porsche he was going to put a down payment on later that afternoon. He was thinking about the debts he could wipe clean. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. Mr. Kavanaugh opened his briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in a red folder. "Yes, the estate," Mr. Kavanaugh said slowly. "That is precisely why I am here. As you know, Lucas Bennett was a man who lived largely." "Largely," Brad repeated, nodding enthusiastically. "Yes, he was always a big spender. Big investments." Mr. Kavanaugh adjusted his glasses and looked down at the papers. He was indeed. However, the last few years were not kind to the market in California. High-risk ventures often come with high consequences. The smile on Brad's face faltered slightly. A flicker of doubt crossed Tiffany's eyes. The air in the room began to shift. The celebratory mood was evaporating, replaced by a creeping coldness. "What do you mean?" Tiffany asked, her voice losing its sugary sweetness. Mr. Kavanaugh looked up. "I mean that when Lucas passed away, his assets were significantly lower than his liabilities. To put it plainly, he died deeply in debt." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. I watched Brad's mouth open and close like a fish out of water. I watched Tiffany's face drain of all color, turning a pasty gray. "Debt," Brad choked out the word like it was a bone stuck in his throat. "What kind of debt?" Mr. Kavanaugh flipped a page casually. "Primary creditors are demanding immediate repayment. There are liens on his properties, unpaid taxes, and outstanding personal loans. The total deficit comes to roughly $150,000. $150,000, Tiffany shrieked. Her voice cracked. She grabbed the back of the sofa to steady herself. "But wait," Brad interrupted, sweat instantly beading on his forehead. That is his debt. That has nothing to do with us. He is dead. The debt dies with him, right?" Mr. Kavanaugh shook his head slowly, a look of mock sympathy on his face. It was a masterclass in acting. "Under normal circumstances, yes. However, there is a complication. The family responsibility statutes in California are quite specific regarding next of kin. Since Harrison here is the sole surviving brother and was listed as a guarantor on several of Lucas's early filings, the liability transfers." He turned to look at me for the first time. I shrank back in my chair, letting my mouth hang open. "Me," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I have to pay. But I don't have any money." Mr. Kavanaugh turned back to Brad and Tiffany. "Precisely. Harrison is indigent. Which brings us to you." To us, Brad stepped back as if Mr. Kavanaugh had just pulled a knife. "Yes." Mr. Kavanaugh continued relentlessly. "I understand you are Harrison's primary caregivers. I understand you were just discussing a power of attorney to manage his financial affairs. If you assume guardianship of Harrison, you assume control of his estate. And his estate now includes this debt. The trap snapped shut. It was beautiful and terrifying. Mr. Kavanaugh had taken their greed and turned it into a noose around their necks. They had been so eager to take control of my finances 10 minutes ago. Now that control meant financial ruin. Brad looked at the power of attorney document in his pocket. He looked at it as if it were burning a hole through his shirt. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the gears turning in his head. He was doing the math. If he claimed me, he claimed the debt. If he claimed the inheritance he thought was coming, he would lose everything he owned. No, Rad had whispered. Mr. Kavanaugh raised an eyebrow. No. We haven't signed anything yet, Rad said, his voice rising in pitch. We are not his guardians. Not legally. He is just staying here. Tiffany jumped, in her survival instinct kicking in. That is right. He is just a guest. We don't have power of attorney. We don't have access to his accounts. We are barely making ends meet as it is. We cannot pay $150,000. Are you crazy? Mr. Kavanaugh looked at his notes. But surely as his daughter you would not want to see your father face legal action. The creditors can be quite aggressive. They could garnish his pension. They could seize his personal effects. Let them take it, Brad shouted. He lost his composure completely. The veneer of the loving son-in-law shattered into a million pieces. Let them take his pension. It is barely enough to buy groceries anyway. Look at him. He has nothing. Brad, Tiffany hissed, grabbing his arm, but he shook her off. No, Tiff, wake up, Brad yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. We thought he was getting millions. Instead, he brings us debt. We are already drowning. We are not taking on another anchor. He turned to Mr. Kavanaugh, his face red and distorted with rage. You can take your papers and get out. We are not paying a dime. We have nothing to do with this. Mr. Kavanaugh remained calm. So you are refusing to accept responsibility for Harrison's financial obligations. You are refusing to act as his support system in this matter. Hell yes, I refuse, Brad screamed. I am not ruining my life for an old man who can't even pay rent. Brad, please, I said, speaking up softly. My heart was pounding, but not from fear anymore. It was pounding with the adrenaline of the truth. We can figure this out. We are family. Family? Brad laughed, a harsh barking sound that made me flinch. Family pulls their weight, Harrison. Family doesn't drag you down into a pit. You have been mooching off us for 3 years. And now you bring this. He walked over to the door and flung it open. Get out, he said to Mr. Kavanaugh. Mr. Kavanaugh closed his briefcase slowly. He stood up. Very well. I will mark down that the family has declined intervention. However, this leaves Harrison in a precarious position. If he cannot stay here... He can't stay here, Brad interrupted. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. If he has got a debt, he can go work it off. He is not my problem anymore. Tiffany stood there chewing her lip. I looked at her, begging her with my eyes to say something. To say that I was her father. To say that money didn't matter. Tiffany looked at the floor. I am sorry, Dad, she whispered. We can't afford this. You understand, right? I understood perfectly. I understood that my worth to them was measured in dollars and cents. And now that my balance was negative, I was being discarded. What are you saying? I asked, my voice breaking. I am saying you need to pack your things, Brad said. By tonight, we are done. I watched them. I watched the people I had sacrificed everything for. And in that moment, the last thread of attachment snapped. The pain was searing, but beneath it was a strange sense of liberation. They had just set me free. Mr. Kavanaugh walked to the door, but but he stopped on the threshold. He looked back at me, not at them. "I will give you until tomorrow to vacate the premises," Brad sneered. "After that, I am changing the locks." Mr. Kavanaugh nodded once at me. A signal. The test was over. They had failed, and now it was time for the verdict. The silence in the room was shattered by Tiffany's shriek. It wasn't a cry of sorrow or concern. It was the sound of a wounded animal lashing out a piercing noise that made the glass on the coffee table vibrate. She took 2 steps towards me, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated ugliness. The daughter I had raised, the little girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee, was gone. In her place stood a stranger consumed by the panic of losing money she never even had. "You knew," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. Her nail was painted a bright, aggressive red, and it shook with the force of her rage. "You knew about the debt, didn't you? That is why you came back here. That is why you have been hiding in that room like a rat. You were trying to trick us into signing that paper so you could dump his bankruptcy on us." I stared at her, too stunned to speak. The accusation was so twisted, so devoid of logic, that I couldn't find the words to defend myself. I had come back to give them millions, and they were accusing me of setting a trap. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. "You are a parasite," she continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "You sold your house and wasted the money, and now you want to drag us down into the gutter with you. You sat there eating our food, using our electricity, plotting to ruin us. You are sick. You are absolutely sick." Mr. Kavanaugh stepped forward, effectively placing his body between me and her verbal assault. He remained calm, his voice an anchor in the storm of their hysteria. "Mrs. Ross," he said, his tone icy and precise, "I must ask you for the record. Are you formally declining legal guardianship of your father? I need to be clear. If you decline, you are stating that you have no interest in his assets or his liabilities. You are severing the financial and custodial tie." "Assets," Brad barked from the hallway, spinning around. His face was a deep shade of purple. "There are no assets. You just said he is in the hole for 150 grand. You think we are stupid. We are not taking the bait." Brad marched back into the room, his eyes wild. He looked at me with a hatred that chilled my blood. It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was the look you give to something disgusting on the bottom of your shoe. "I want him out," Brad growled. "Now. Not tomorrow. Right now." "But Brad," I started, my voice weak. "I have nowhere to go. It is freezing outside." "I don't care if it is a blizzard," Brad yelled. He lunged past me, heading straight for the back of the house. I heard him stomp down the hallway to my small room. I heard the sound of the door banging against the wall. Then came the sounds of destruction. I heard drawers being ripped open. I heard the crash of objects hitting the floor. It sounded like he was tearing the room apart. Tiffany stood there, her arms crossed, breathing heavily, watching me with cold, dead eyes. She didn't move to stop him. She didn't look away. She wanted this. She wanted me erased. Moments later, Brad reappeared. He was dragging 2 large, black, heavy-duty trash bags. He had stuffed everything I owned into them. My clothes, my few books, the framed photo of my late wife that I kept on the nightstand. He hadn't packed them. He had shoveled them in like garbage. He didn't stop walking. He marched straight to the front door, kicked it open, and heaved the bags out onto the front porch. They landed with a dull thud, one of them splitting open, spilling my gray wool socks onto the wet concrete. "Get your things," Brad said, breathing hard, "and get out." I stood up slowly. My legs felt heavy, like they were made of lead. I looked at Tiffany one last time. I looked for a flicker of regret. I looked for a trace of the daughter who used to make me handmade cards for Father's Day. "Tiffany," I said softly, "please, don't do this." She looked at me, her lip curling in a sneer. "You brought this on yourself, Harrison. Go find someone else to leech off of. We are done, Mr. Kavanaugh moved to assist me, offering his arm. But Brad stepped in. He grabbed the sleeve of my cardigan. His grip was hard, his fingers digging into my old muscle. "He is not moving fast enough," Brad spat. He yanked me towards the door. I stumbled, my boots catching on the rug. I was 70 years old. I wasn't frail, but I wasn't a match for a 40-year-old man fueled by rage and adrenaline. He dragged me across the threshold like I was a sack of cement. "Get off my property," he shouted. He gave me a final violent shove. I lost my balance. My feet slipped on the slick surface of the porch. I flailed my arms trying to catch myself, but it was too late. I fell backwards. My body hit the concrete steps hard. Pain exploded in my hip and shoulder. The breath was knocked out of me. I rolled down the 2 small steps and landed on the cold, hard walkway leading to the driveway. The impact jarred my teeth and sent shockwaves through my spine. I lay there for a moment, stunned, looking up at the gray sky. The cold from the ground seeped instantly through my clothes. I gasped for air, my chest heaving. Mr. Kavanaugh rushed out, his composure finally cracking. He knelt beside me, his face filled with alarm. "Harrison, are you all right? Don't move. Let me check you." I waved him off weakly. I was hurt, but nothing was broken. The physical pain was sharp, but the emotional pain was a dull, crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. I pushed myself up to a sitting position, my hands scraping against the rough pavement. I looked up at the door. Brad and Tiffany stood there, framed by the warm light of the hallway. They looked like giants. They looked like conquerors. "If I see you here again," Brad yelled, his voice echoing down the quiet street, "I will call the cops and have you arrested for trespassing. You hear me?" Trespassing. Tiffany stepped forward, grabbing the door handle. She looked down at me, shivering on the ground amidst my scattered belongings. Her eyes were dry. Her face was set in stone. "Don't ever come back here," she screamed, her voice shrill and final. "I don't care what happens to you. You can die in the street for all I care. Just leave us alone." And then, with a force that shook the frame of the house, she slammed the door. The sound was like a gunshot. It echoed in the silence of the morning. Then came the click of the deadbolt sliding into place. Then the chain lock. They had locked me out. They had thrown me away. I sat there on the cold concrete, surrounded by black plastic bags. A light snow began to fall, tiny white flakes landing on my dark coat. I reached up and touched my cheek. It was wet. I wasn't sure if it was melting snow or tears. Mr. Kavanaugh helped me to my feet. He dusted off my coat, his movements gentle and respectful. He looked at the closed door, and his eyes were dark with a righteous fury. "We have everything," he whispered, tapping the pen in his pocket. "Every word. Every action. The assault. The eviction. It is all recorded." I looked at the closed door one last time. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a strange, hollow emptiness. The part of me that was a father had just died on these steps. But the part of me that was a survivor was just starting to wake up. I turned away from the house. I didn't pick up the trash bags. I left them there, spilling onto the lawn. I didn't need those old clothes. I didn't need the memories attached to them. "Let's go," I said to Mr. Kavanaugh, my voice steady despite the pain in my hip. "Take me to the hotel. I have a new life to start, and they have a reckoning coming." We walked towards the waiting car, leaving footprints in the fresh dusting of snow. Behind us inside the house, I knew they were celebrating. I knew they were hugging each other, relieved that they had dodged a bullet. They had no idea that the bullet was already in the chamber, and the trigger had just been pulled. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed in my ears, like the final note of a funeral dirge. But as the echo faded, something strange happened. The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest for 3 years simply vanished. I looked at the black trash bags scattered on the wet lawn, the sum total of my life according to my daughter. And I felt a sudden fierce surge of energy. I was not trash. I was not a burden. I was Harrison Bennett, and I was finally free. Mr. Kavanaugh extended his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and respectful. I took it, and with a groan of exertion that was more habit than necessity, I pulled myself up from the cold concrete. I brushed the snow off my coat. I dusted the grit from my pants. With every swipe of my hand, I wasn't just cleaning my clothes. I was wiping away their insults, their condescension, and their cruelty. I looked at the closed door one last time. It was just wood and paint. It held no power over me anymore. "Let's go," I said, my voice steady and deep. Mr. Kavanaugh nodded and raised his hand. A black Lincoln town car, which had been idling discreetly around the corner, pulled up to the curb. The driver, a large man with a compassionate face, hopped out and opened the rear door. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't care if they were watching from behind the curtains. I stepped into the warmth of the car, sinking into the soft leather seats that smelled of cedar and success. As the car pulled away, navigating the potholes of the street where I had suffered so much humiliation, the dam finally broke. I didn't want to cry. I was a man of the old school, a man who believed in keeping his chin up. But the tears came anyway. They were hot and fast, streaming down my cheeks and dripping onto my worn-out cardigan. Mr. Kavanaugh handed me a linen handkerchief without a word. "I am sorry," I choked out, wiping my eyes. "It is just—" "You don't have to apologize, Harrison," he said softly. "You just buried your family. It is okay to grieve." I shook my head. "No," I said, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "I am not crying because I miss them. I am crying because I am relieved. I am crying because I don't have to be afraid of my own food anymore. I don't have to sleep with one eye open. It is over, Kavanaugh. The nightmare is actually over." Mr. Kavanaugh smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "It is my friend. And now the fun begins. What are your instructions?" I sat up straighter. I folded the damp handkerchief and placed it in my pocket. I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline rising in the distance, gray and steel against the winter sky. It looked beautiful. It looked like a playground. "Execute Phase 2. I said, my voice hardening into steel. "Release the press statement and take me to the Ritz-Carlton. I am done living like a rat." The drive to the city center was a transition between two worlds. We left behind the cramped, suffocating atmosphere of the suburbs and entered the wide, bustling avenues of wealth and power. When the car stopped in front of the Ritz-Carlton, the doorman didn't look at my trash bag luggage or my muddy boots with disdain. He opened the door with a bow, treating me with more dignity in 5 seconds than Brad had shown me in 5 years. Mr. Kavanaugh had arranged everything. The check-in was seamless. I was ushered into a suite on the 45th floor, a space larger than the entire ground floor of Tiffany's house. The windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, vast and endless. I stood there for a long time just breathing. Then I went into the bathroom. It was a palace of marble and gold. I turned on the shower, setting the temperature to high. I stripped off the old flannel shirt, the baggy trousers, the thermal underwear that had lost its elasticity. I stepped under the spray. The hot water was a baptism. I scrubbed my skin until it was pink. I washed away the smell of the damp storage room. I washed away the scent of Brad's cheap air freshener. I washed away the feeling of being small. I stood there for 20 minutes, letting the steam clean my soul. When I stepped out and wrapped myself in a thick white robe, I felt like a newborn. A knock came at the door. It was not room service. Mr. Kavanaugh had sent a team, a barber and a tailor. The barber, a quiet Italian man, trimmed my hair, removing the shaggy, neglected growth that Tiffany had always said was too expensive to cut professionally. He shaved my face with a straight razor, hot towels, and soothing oils. When he was done, the haggard, scruffy old man was gone. My jawline was sharp. My eyes were clear. Then came the clothes. No more cardigans. No more elastic waistbands. The tailor laid out a suit that Mr. Kavanaugh had commissioned based on my old measurements. It was charcoal gray Italian wool with a subtle pinstripe. The shirt was crisp white cotton, starched to perfection. The shoes were polished leather that shone like mirrors. I dressed slowly, savoring the feel of quality fabric against my skin. It was armor. I buttoned the vest. I adjusted the silk tie. I slipped on the jacket, feeling the weight of it settle on my shoulders. It fit perfectly. It made me stand taller. It forced my spine to straighten. I walked to the full-length mirror in the hallway. I stopped. The man staring back at me was not the Harrison Bennett who had been thrown off a porch 3 hours ago. That man was dead. The man in the mirror was powerful. He had silver hair that looked distinguished, not messy. He had lines on his face that showed wisdom, not weakness. He looked like a man who owned skyscrapers, not a man who begged for soup. I touched the cold glass, meeting my own eyes. "You are still here," I whispered to my reflection. "They tried to break you. They tried to kill you. But you are still here." I went to the desk and sat down. I ordered a steak dinner rare with a bottle of expensive red wine. I ate it slowly, savoring every bite, thinking of the watery broth I had been forced to slurp the night before. I slept that night in a king-sized bed with sheets that felt like clouds. I didn't check the door lock. I didn't listen for footsteps. I slept the sleep of the just. The next morning, I woke up with the sun. I felt rested, energized, and ready for war. I put on my robe and opened the door to find the morning newspapers waiting for me on a silver tray, along with a pot of fresh coffee. I picked up the Chicago Tribune. I didn't have to search for the news. It was right there, screaming from the bottom half of the front page. Mr. Kavanaugh had timed the press release perfectly to catch the morning cycle. The headline was bold, black, and beautiful. "Mystery of Real Estate. Tycoon Lucas Bennett solved multi-million-dollar fortune left to sole heir." I smiled a cold, hard smile. I took a sip of coffee and read the first paragraph. Late California developer Lucas Bennett, known for his eccentric lifestyle and massive property portfolio, has left his entire estate valued at over $12 million to his estranged brother, Chicago local Harrison Bennett. Attorneys for the estate confirm that the search for the heir is complete. I folded the paper calmly. Across town in a small, peeling house, I knew that Tiffany and Brad were waking up. I knew Brad would be reaching for his phone to check the sports scores. I knew Tiffany would be scrolling through social media. And in about 5 minutes, their world was going to explode. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast. "Good morning, Tiffany," I said to the wind. "I hope you enjoy the news." The phoenix had risen from the ashes of their betrayal, and now it was time to let the fire burn. While I was enjoying my first cup of coffee in years that didn't taste like disappointment, the house I had left behind was descending into absolute chaos. I learned the details later through the neighbors and the security footage Mr. Kavanaugh had legally obtained, but I can picture it as clearly as if I were standing there. The silence of the house was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of pending doom. Brad was pacing the living room, biting his fingernails down to the quick. He was waiting for a miracle, but instead, he got a reckoning. It started with a heavy rhythmic pounding on the front door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the kind of sound that makes the windows rattle in their frames. Brad froze. He knew that knock. It wasn't the mailman, and it certainly wasn't a customer wanting to buy a used sedan. It was Rocco. Rocco was a man Brad owed $5,000 to from a disastrous bet on a football game 3 weeks prior. Brad scrambled to the door, checking the peephole. He turned back to Tiffany, his face pale and sweating. "It is him," he hissed. "It is Rocco. Don't open it." Tiffany was sitting on the sofa, scrolling aimlessly through her phone, trying to ignore the reality of their financial ruin. She rolled her eyes. You have to deal with him, Brad. You said the insurance money would cover it. Well, there is no insurance money. There is only debt. The pounding came again, louder this time, accompanied by a muffled shout. I know you are in there, Ross. Open up or I take the door off its hinges. Brad opened the door just a crack, leaving the chain on. Rocco, listen, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I need a little more time. Just a few days. My father-in-law, we are sorting out his estate. Rocco didn't care about estates. He cared about cash. You have 24 hours, he growled through the crack. Or I start taking things, and I don't mean furniture. Brad slammed the door and leaned his back against it, sliding down until he hit the floor. He put his head in his hands. We are dead, Tiff. We are actually dead. We have the mortgage, the car payments, and now this. And we just kicked out the only person whose pension was helping with the groceries. Tiffany didn't answer. She was staring at her phone screen, her mouth hanging open. The color had drained from her face so completely she looked like a wax figure. She wasn't looking at Brad. She was looking at the news feed. Brad, she whispered. Her voice was trembling so hard it was barely audible. Brad didn't look up. What now? Stand up, she screamed, leaping off the sofa. Stand up and look at this right now. She shoved the phone into his face. It was the same article I had read that morning. The headline screamed in bold black letters. Local man inherits millions. Lucas Bennett leaves fortune to brother. Brad grabbed the phone. His eyes scanned the text frantically. Sole heir. $12 million in real estate and liquid assets. No debts. No liabilities. He dropped the phone. It hit the rug with a dull thud. No, he whispered. No, that is impossible. The lawyer said, that guy Kavanaugh said there was a debt. He said Lucas died broke. Tiffany began to pace the room, hyperventilating. He lied. He played us. It was a test. Don't you see, you idiot? It was a test to see if we would stand by him. And we failed. We didn't just fail. We threw him out in the snow. The realization hit them both like a freight train. The $150,000 debt was a fiction. The $12 million fortune was real. And it belonged to the man they had just evicted like a stray dog. Brad scrambled for his own phone. His fingers were shaking so badly he dropped it twice before he could unlock it. Call him, he yelled. Call him right now. Tell him it was a mistake. Tell him we were just stressed. He dialed my number. I watched the call come in on my old phone, which was sitting on the desk in my hotel room. I had not turned it off. I wanted to see them try. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then I declined the call. Brad looked at Tiffany, panic rising in his eyes. He sent me to voicemail. Call him from yours. Tiffany dialed. Again, I let it ring. Then I declined it. He is not answering, she shrieked. She threw her phone onto the cushions. Oh my God, Brad. We threw away $12 million. We threw away a villa in Malibu. Do you understand what we did? Then the fighting started. It was ugly. The thin veneer of their marriage dissolved instantly under the acid of their greed. This is your fault, Tiffany screamed, pointing a finger at Brad. You were the one who swapped his pills. You were the one who dragged him out the door. I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to reason with him. Me, Brad roared back, his face turning purple. You were the one who wanted to put him in a state home. You stood there and watched me throw his bags out. You slammed the door in his face, Tiffany. You told him to die in the street. You think he is going to forget that? They ran to the window, looking out at the empty porch. The trash bags were gone. I had left them, but the neighborhood sanitation truck had come by an hour ago and cleared them away. To them, it looked like I had vanished into thin air. They ran outside, Brad in his socks, Tiffany without a coat. They looked up and down the street. Dad, Tiffany screamed, her voice echoing off the neighboring houses. Dad, come back. We didn't mean it. But the street was empty. The snow was falling softly, covering the spot where I had fallen. There was no sign of Harrison Bennett. They went back inside, shivering and defeated. The house felt smaller now. It felt like a cage. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence stretching between them. They knew they had lost everything. The money, the house, the future. And then a sound broke the silence. A soft ping from Brad's phone. He looked at it dully. It was an email notification. He opened it, expecting another bill or a threat from the bookie. His eyes widened. He grabbed Tiffany's arm. Tiff, look. He held the screen up. It was an email from the law offices of Kavanaugh and Associates. The subject line read, "Official reading of the last will and testament." Brad read the text aloud, his voice trembling with a sudden desperate hope. Mr. Harrison Bennett requests the presence of his daughter, Tiffany Bennett Ross, and his son-in-law, Bradley Ross, at the formal reading of the will of Lucas Bennett. The event will take place tonight at 7 o'clock at the Grand Restaurant, Private Dining Room B. Tiffany grabbed the phone, reading the words over and over again. "He is inviting us," she whispered. "He is inviting us to the reading." Brad let out a laugh, a manic, hysterical sound. I knew it. I knew he wouldn't cut us out. He is soft, Tiff. He has always been soft. He probably thinks we were just trying to protect ourselves from the debt. He doesn't know about the pill swap. He doesn't know we were serious. Hope is a dangerous drug, and they were overdosing on it. They began to spin a new narrative. They convinced themselves that I was the same old pushover. They convinced themselves that blood was thicker than water even after they had poisoned the well. "He needs us," Brad said, standing up and smoothing his hair. "He is an old man with $12 million. He doesn't know how to handle that kind of money. He needs family. He needs guidance." Tiffany nodded, wiping her eyes and fixing her makeup. "You are right. We just need to go there, look humble, maybe cry a little. We will tell him we were just scared of the creditors. We will say we did it to protect him from the stress. He will believe us. He always believes us." They started moving with a frantic energy. Brad ran to the closet to find his best suit. Tiffany began pulling dresses out, holding them up to the mirror. "We have to look rich," Brad shouted from the bedroom. "We have to look like we belong at the Grand. We have to look like his heirs." They had no idea. They thought they were being invited to a coronation. They didn't realize they were being invited to a trial. And the verdict had already been decided. I sat in my hotel room checking the read receipt on the email. Opened at 10:45 a.m. I closed my laptop. The bait had been taken. The fish were on the hook. Now all I had to do was reel them in and let the world see them wriggle. I looked at the time. 7 hours to go. I decided to take a nap. I wanted to be well rested for the show. The lobby of the Ritz-Carlton smells of fresh lilies and old money. It is a scent that acts like a barrier to keep out the desperate and the fake. But that afternoon, my daughter and her husband walked right through the revolving doors, bringing the smell of fear with them. They looked like actors in a play who had not quite memorized their lines. Brad was wearing a navy blue suit that was a size too tight across the shoulders. I knew for a fact he had pawned his golf clubs 2 hours ago to buy it off the rack at a department store. Tiffany was wearing a black cocktail dress and pearls that I recognized from her credit card statements, the ones she claimed she could not pay. They were dressed for a celebration, but their eyes were darting around the room like trapped animals looking for an exit. I was sitting in a high-backed velvet chair near the fireplace. I held a crystal tumbler of sparkling water in my hand. I wasn't hiding. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to see the transformation. I had spent the last 3 hours preparing for this moment, not just physically, but mentally. I had locked away the heartbroken father and unleashed the judge. When Tiffany finally spotted me, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her hand flew to her mouth. I could see the shock register on her face. She was expecting the old man in the stained cardigan. She was expecting the frail, defeated figure she had left on the porch. Instead, she saw a man who looked like he owned the hotel. The Italian suit fit me like a second skin. My hair was groomed, my posture was erect. I looked at her over the rim of my glass, and I didn't smile. She grabbed Brad's arm and whispered something frantically. Brad looked over and his jaw practically hit the marble floor. For a second, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He realized he was looking at a stranger. But then the greed kicked in. It washed over his face, smoothing out the panic, replacing it with a slimy confidence. He adjusted his tie and nudged Tiffany forward. Here they come, I thought to myself, taking a slow sip of water. The show is about to start. They hurried across the lobby, their footsteps echoing on the polished floor. As they got closer, Tiffany let out a sob. It was a loud, theatrical sound that made a couple at a nearby table look up. She ran the last few steps and threw herself at my feet, grabbing my hands. "Daddy!" She wailed, her voice trembling with a performance worthy of an award. "Oh my God, Daddy. We found you. We finally found you." She buried her face in my lap. I felt her tears soaking into the expensive wool of my trousers. But I knew they were not tears of relief. They were tears of calculation. She was crying because she was terrified the check wouldn't clear. I looked down at the top of her head. I didn't stroke her hair. I didn't pull her into a hug. I just sat there, immobile like a statue. Brad stepped up behind her, putting a hand on her shoulder and looking at me with a face full of faux concern. "Harrison, thank God. We have been out of our minds. We have been driving around the city for 6 hours looking for you. We called the hospitals. We called the police. We thought we lost you." The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. 6 hours ago, they were celebrating my departure. They hadn't called anyone. They had probably been looking at brochures for new cars. I gently removed my hands from Tiffany's grip. I placed my glass on the table with a deliberate click. "Stand up, Tiffany," I said calmly. "You are making a scene." She looked up at me, startled by the coldness in my voice. But she recovered quickly. She stood up, wiping her eyes carefully so as not to smudge her mascara. "I am sorry, Daddy," she sniffled. "I am just so emotional. Yesterday was a nightmare. The stress of the debt, the fear of losing the house. We just snapped. We didn't mean any of it. You know that, right? You know we love you." I looked her in the eye. I saw the desperate pleading there. She was searching for the doormat she used to walk on. She was searching for the father who would forgive anything just to be included. "I understand," I said slowly, keeping my face unreadable. "Stress makes people do strange things. It reveals who they really are under pressure." Brad took that as a sign of forgiveness. He let out a long exhale and pulled up a chair, sitting down uninvited. "Exactly, Harrison. Exactly. It was the pressure. That lawyer, Mr. Kavanaugh, he came in and dropped a bomb on us. We panicked. We were trying to protect you, really. We thought if we distanced ourselves, the creditors wouldn't come after your pension. It was a strategy. A bad one, sure. But we were trying to save you." I watched him spin the lie. It was almost impressive how quickly he could invent history. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "But now we know the truth," Brad said, a greedy smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We saw the news. Lucas didn't leave debt. He left a fortune. That lawyer must have been confused, or maybe it was a clerical error. But none of that matters now. We are here. We are family. And we are going to help you manage this. $12 million is a lot of responsibility for someone of your generation." He was already doing it. He was already trying to take control. He couldn't help himself. I picked up my water again, swirling the ice. You are right, Brad. It is a lot of responsibility. And family is important. That is why I invited you here tonight. Tiffany's face lit up. She sat down next to me, placing her hand on my arm. Her touch felt cold. I knew it, Daddy. I knew you wouldn't abandon us. We are all you have. We have a lot to discuss, I said, pulling my arm away gently under the pretense of checking my watch. The reading is in 30 minutes, Mr. Kavanaugh has prepared everything. He wants to make sure the transition of assets is handled appropriately. Appropriately, Brad repeated, nodding vigorously. Yes, absolutely. We need to make sure the assets are secure. You know, Tiffany has a background in real estate. She can handle the properties. And I can help with the investments. We can set up a family trust. Keep everything in-house. He was already spending the money. He was already buying the Porsche in his head. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. The movement made them jump. I need to go upstairs and freshen up before the meeting, I said. You two stay here. Order a drink. Put it on my room tab. I will see you in the private dining room at 7 sharp. Thank you, Daddy, Tiffany said, beaming. She looked relieved. She thought she had pulled it off. She thought the tears had worked. I walked away from them, moving towards the elevators. I didn't look back. But I didn't have to look back to know what they were doing. I could feel their excitement radiating across the lobby. I stopped behind a large potted palm near the elevator bank. I wasn't going up yet. I wanted to hear it. I needed to hear it. I saw Brad lean in close to Tiffany. He looked around to make sure I was gone. Then he grabbed her hand and squeezed it. I told you, he whispered loud enough for me to hear. I told you the old man was soft. He bought it hook, line, and sinker. Did you see his face? He actually believes we were worried about him. Tiffany giggled, a sound that made my stomach turn. He is so desperate for attention, she said. A few tears, and he melts. We are going to be rich, Brad. Filthy rich. I am going to book a trip to Paris tomorrow. He is clueless, Brad scoffed, leaning back and putting his feet up on the expensive coffee table. He thinks he is in charge because he is wearing a suit. But give it a month. We will have power of attorney. We will declare him incompetent if we have to. But for now, we just play along. Just a few more hours of being the good kids, and then we take everything. I stood there in the shadow of the palm tree. A cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the smile of the executioner sharpening his blade. They thought I was soft. They thought I was clueless. They thought they had won. I pressed the button for the elevator. The doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside and watched the doors close, shutting out the sight of my daughter and her husband, high-fiving in the lobby. You are right, Brad, I whispered to the empty car. We will settle everything tonight. But you are not going to Paris. You are going to prison. The elevator began to rise, taking me up away from the filth of their lives. The stage was set. The audience was waiting. And the actors had no idea that the play was a tragedy, and they were the villains who died in the end. The private dining room at the Grand Restaurant was a world away from the drafty kitchen, where I had eaten watery soup just 24 hours earlier. The walls were lined with silk damask, and a crystal chandelier hung above the mahogany table like a constellation of frozen stars. It was a room designed for captains of industry and old money families, not for a couple of grifters who had just pawned their golf clubs to buy a suit. But Brad and Tiffany did not seem to notice the incongruity. They sat in the high-backed leather chairs with the arrogance of royalty who had just reclaimed their throne. I watched Brad pick up the wine list. He didn't even look at the descriptions. He just looked at the prices in the right-hand column. He ran his finger down the list until he found a number that satisfied his ego. We will take the Chateau Margaux, he told the waiter, snapping the leather binder shut with a flourish. The 2015 vintage. And bring 3 glasses. We have a lot to celebrate tonight. He looked at me and winked. A $500 bottle of wine. A day ago he claimed he couldn't afford to pay the heating bill. Now he was spending my money before the ink was even dry on the paper. I ordered a sparkling water. I wanted to keep a clear head. I wanted to remember every second of this meal. When the food arrived, it was an obscene display of gluttony. Brad had ordered the lobster thermidor, the most expensive item on the menu. Tiffany had chosen the Wagyu beef. They ate with a voracious hunger, the grease shining on their lips, washing down the rich food with heavy gulps of the expensive red wine. They clinked their glasses repeatedly, toasting to family, to the future, to Lucas Bennett. They toasted the man whose death they were profiting from without a shred of genuine respect. I picked at my salad watching them. It was fascinating in a morbid way. They were so confident. They had convinced themselves that the little charade in the lobby had worked. They thought I was the senile old fool who believed their crocodile tears. They thought they had secured the bag, Harrison Brad said, leaning back and patting his stomach. This is the life, isn't it? You deserve this, after all those years of hard work. And don't you worry about the logistics. Tiff and I were talking in the car. We are going to find a nice big house with a guest suite on the ground floor. No more stairs for you. We are going to hire a nurse to come in daily. Top-of-the-line care. Tiffany nodded enthusiastically, her mouth full of steak. Yes, Daddy. We want you to be comfortable. We are going to take care of everything. I smiled a thin, tight smile. I am sure you will, I said softly. At 7:15 precisely, the heavy oak doors opened and Mr. Kavanaugh entered. He did not sit down to eat. He walked to the head of the table and placed his briefcase on the white tablecloth. He looked at the lobster shells and the empty wine bottle with a faint expression of distaste. Good evening, he said, his voice cutting through the convivial atmosphere like a scalpel. I trust everyone is comfortable. Brad wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and sat up straighter. We are great, Mr. Kavanaugh. Just great. We are ready when you are. Mr. Kavanaugh opened the briefcase. He took out the same red folder he had held in their living room that morning. But this time he pulled out a different set of documents. These were printed on thick, cream-colored paper with gold leaf borders, as per the instructions of the late Lucas Bennett. Mr. Kavanaugh began putting on his reading glasses. I am here to formally disclose the assets of his estate and transfer ownership to his sole beneficiary, Mr. Harrison Bennett. Brad reached for Tiffany's hand under the table. I saw their knuckles turn white. They were holding their breath. The estate consists of the following, Mr. Kavanaugh read in a monotone drone. First, the primary residence, a 6-bedroom villa located at 2400 Pacific Coast Highway, Malibu, California. The property includes private beach access, a guest house, and a 4-car garage. Current market valuation is $4.2 million. I heard Tiffany gasp. A beach house. She had always talked about wanting a beach house. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the light of the chandelier. Second, Mr. Kavanaugh continued, ignoring her reaction. 2 penthouse condominiums located in the Gaslamp quarter of San Diego. Both are currently under long-term lease agreements, generating a monthly revenue of $12,000 each. Brad let out a low whistle. That is 24 grand a month, he whispered. That is passive income, Tiff. We don't even have to work. And finally, Mr. Kavanaugh said, turning the page, the liquid assets, including stocks, bonds, and cash reserves held in the trust. The total value of the investment portfolio is $8,450,000. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. $8 million. It was a number that was too big for them to comprehend. It was freedom. It was power. It was everything they had ever wanted. Brad looked at me. His eyes were shining with tears. Real tears this time. Tears of joy. Tears of greed. He looked at me like I was a god. "Oh, Harrison," he choked out. "Oh my God. Do you hear that? You are wealthy. This is a miracle." He picked up his wine glass, his hand shaking uncontrollably. To Lucas he stammered, "To the best brother in the world." Tiffany was crying too. She was already mentally redecorating the Malibu villa. She was imagining the parties she would throw. She was imagining the envy of her friends. Mr. Kavanaugh let them celebrate for a full minute. He let them soak in the euphoria. He let them reach the absolute peak of their happiness. He waited until they were completely vulnerable, their guards down, their hearts open to the influx of wealth. Then he closed the folder. The sound was sharp. It drew their attention back to him immediately. "There is, however, a condition," Mr. Kavanaugh said. Brad waved his hand dismissively. Of course, taxes, fees, we know. We will handle it. Just show us where to sign." Mr. Kavanaugh did not move the papers towards them. He kept his hand firmly on the folder. "It is not a financial condition," Mr. Kavanaugh said. "It is a character clause." Lucas Bennett was very specific. He wanted to ensure that his fortune would only benefit those who treated his brother with respect and dignity. Brad froze. His smile faltered slightly. "Well, that is no problem," he said, his voice a little too loud. "We are family. We love Harrison. We have always supported him." Mr. Kavanaugh looked at Brad over the top of his glasses. The look was withering. It was the look of a predator about to pounce. "Are you sure about that?" Mr. Ross, the lawyer, asked. "Of course I am sure," Brad said, looking at me for backup. "Tell him, Harrison. Tell him how we took you in. Tell him how we gave you a home when you sold yours." I said nothing. I just watched him. Mr. Kavanaugh reached into his briefcase one last time. He did not pull out a paper. He pulled out a small silver remote control. He pointed it at the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall at the far end of the private room. "Before the assets can be released," Mr. Kavanaugh said, his voice dropping an octave, "there is an evidence addendum that must be reviewed. It was recorded quite recently. In fact, some of it was recorded this morning." He pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. The image was grainy at first, but then it sharpened. It was a view from a high shelf, a view looking down into a living room. Brad and Tiffany stared at the screen. Confusion clouded their faces. That is our living room," Tiffany whispered. And then the audio kicked in. It was crystal clear. "If the old man kicks the bucket before the new year, the payout covers everything." Brad's voice filled the dining room. "I swapped them. He has been taking sugar pills since Tuesday. The next time his chest tightens, he will reach for his medicine, and it won't do a damn thing." Brad dropped his wine glass. It hit the table, shattering the stem. The dark red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth, spreading like a fresh wound. He didn't move to clean it up. He couldn't move. He was paralyzed. On the screen, the scene changed. It was the hallway. "Get out. Kut kut ngay chuki bonchu no dende. Don't ever come back here. You can die in the street for all I care." The video played on a montage of their cruelty, their hatred, and their murderous intent. And finally, it showed the scene from the lobby just 30 minutes ago. "We will declare him incompetent if we have to. Just a few more hours of being the good kids and then we take everything." Mr. Kavanaugh pressed the pause button. The room fell into a silence that was heavier than death. He looked at Brad, whose face had gone from flushed to a sickly, ghostly white. "This," Mr. Kavanaugh said, gesturing to the frozen image of Brad's sneering face on the screen, "is the addendum. And I believe it speaks for itself." The image on the screen was grainy at first, but undeniable. It was a low-angle shot, the perspective of a small child, or in this case, a discarded teddy bear sitting on a dusty shelf. The camera focused on my bed, the sheets rumpled the room dark. Then the door opened. A figure stepped into the frame. It was Brad. He wasn't wearing the expensive suit he wore now. He was wearing his pajamas, looking disheveled and furtive. The silence in the private dining room was so absolute that I could hear the hum of the projector fan. Brad and Tiffany stared at the screen, their mouths slightly open, their forks hovering halfway to their mouths. They were watching a ghost story, only the ghosts were their own sins. On the screen, Brad walked to the nightstand. The audio picked up the sound of his breathing, heavy and nervous. He reached out and picked up the orange prescription bottle. The camera zoomed in slightly, the high-definition lens capturing the moment perfectly. He opened the bottle. He dumped the contents into his hand. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out another bottle. He poured a different set of white pills into the prescription container. The audio crackled, and then Brad's voice filled the room, tinny but distinct. Sugar pills. Let's see how long the old man lasts without the real stuff. In the dining room, the color drained from Brad's face so fast it looked like his blood had simply evaporated. He looked like a corpse sitting upright. His hand, which had been holding the crystal wine glass, began to tremble violently. He tried to set the glass down, but his motor functions had abandoned him. The glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the edge of the table and shattered. The expensive Chateau Margaux, dark and rich as blood, exploded outward. It splashed across the pristine white tablecloth. It soaked into the front of Brad's white dress shirt, spreading in a jagged crimson stain right over his heart. It looked like a gunshot wound. It looked like the physical manifestation of the murder he had planned in his heart. He didn't move to wipe it up. He didn't even blink. He just stared at the screen, paralyzed by the sight of his own crime. But Mr. Kavanaugh was not finished. He pressed the button again. The scene changed. The lighting was harsh, the natural light of a cold winter morning. It was the view from the porch. The camera angle was wide, capturing the front door and the driveway. On screen, the door flew open. I stumbled out, dragged by an invisible force. Then Brad appeared, his face twisted in rage, throwing the black trash bags after me. And then came Tiffany. Tiffany, who was currently sitting next to me wearing pearls and clutching a napkin, watched her digital doppelganger scream with a hatred that made the waiters in the corner turn away in embarrassment. "Don't ever come back here," the on-screen, Tiffany shrieked. "You can die in the street for all I care. Just leave us alone." The video ended with the sound of the door slamming shut. The screen went black. The lights in the dining room slowly brightened. Tiffany was shaking. Her face was a mask of terror. She looked from the blank screen to me, her eyes wide and wet. But this time there were no tears of manipulation. These were tears of pure, unadulterated fear. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some excuse, to say it was taken out of context, but no sound came out. The evidence was too raw, too absolute. I pushed my chair back. The scraping sound was loud in the quiet room. I stood up. I didn't need to shout. My voice was low, steady, and filled with the cold authority of a judge delivering a death sentence. "You wanted a family dinner," I said, looking down at them. "You wanted to celebrate. But you didn't want to celebrate my life. You wanted to celebrate my death." Harrison. Brad croaked, his voice a broken whisper. He touched the wine stain on his chest, his fingers coming away red. It was a joke. A bad joke. I didn't swap them. I was just talking tough. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the plastic bag containing the fake pills I had retrieved from my room. I tossed it onto the table. It landed right in the middle of the spilled wine. "We tested them," I said. 100% compressed sugar. If I had taken these during an angina attack, my heart would have stopped within 10 minutes. "You didn't play a prank, Brad. You loaded a gun and pointed it at my chest." Tiffany began to sob, a high-pitched keening sound. "Daddy, please." We were desperate. We were drowning in debt. We didn't know what we were doing. I looked at her, the daughter I had carried on my shoulders, the daughter I had sold my home for. I looked for love in my heart, but I found only a crater where that love used to be. You knew exactly what you were doing, I said. You were willing to trade my life for a car lease. You were willing to let me freeze on the street to save a few dollars. You are not my children. You are strangers. You are murderers and frauds. Mr. Kavanaugh stepped forward and nodded to the waiter standing by the door. The waiter opened the heavy oak doors. 2 police officers walked in. They were not smiling. They walked with the heavy, purposeful stride of men who had a job to do. Brad scrambled up from his chair, knocking it over. He backed away until he hit the wall. "No," he stammered, holding his hands up. "No, you can't. This is a civil matter. This is a misunderstanding." One of the officers, a sergeant with a stern face, stepped up to Brad. "Bradley Ross, you are under arrest for attempted grievous bodily harm, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud." He grabbed Brad's arm and spun him around. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the room louder than the shattering glass had been. It was the sound of consequences arriving. Tiffany screamed. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my suit jacket. "Daddy, stop them! You can't let them take him! He is my husband! He is family!" I pulled my arm away from her grip. I dusted off the sleeve where she had touched me. Another officer approached Tiffany. "Mrs. Ross, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding your involvement in the conspiracy and the eviction of a vulnerable adult." They didn't handcuff her, but they took her by the arm. She looked at me, her eyes wild, her makeup running in black streaks down her face. Brad was being led out, struggling against the cuffs. He looked back at me, his face contorted with desperation and disbelief. He screamed the one word he thought would save him. "Dad," he yelled. "Bo, you can't do this. I am family. We are family," and I watched him. I watched the man who had laughed about my death. I watched the man who had thrown my wife's picture in a trash bag. I looked him dead in the eye. "Family protects you," I said, my voice cutting through his screams. "Family doesn't kill you. Family doesn't leave you to die in the cold. You lost the right to use that word the moment you touched my medicine." The officers pushed him through the door. Tiffany followed, sobbing uncontrollably, her dreams of Malibu and Paris dissolving into the reality of a holding cell. The doors closed behind them. The room was quiet again. The only evidence of the chaos was the overturned chair and the red stain on the tablecloth. Mr. Kavanaugh exhaled a long breath and began packing his papers back into his briefcase. He looked at me with a sad smile. "Are you all right, Harrison?" he asked. I looked at the closed doors. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The tumor had been removed. It was painful, yes, but now the healing could begin. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. My hand was steady. "I have never been better," I said. "I am ready for the main course now." I sat back down alone at the head of the table. I was a man without a family, but for the first time in years, I was a man with a future. And as I looked out the window at the city lights, I knew that the best years of my life were just beginning. The aftermath of that night at the Grand Restaurant was not the explosive drama the tabloids might have wanted, but it was a slow, grinding slide into reality for the people who had tried to erase me. Brad went to prison. The video evidence of the pill swap was irrefutable, and the judge, a stern woman who had taken care of her own aging parents, showed no mercy. He was sentenced to 8 years for attempted grievous bodily harm and elder abuse. I did not go to his sentencing. I did not need to see him in an orange jumpsuit to know that justice had been served. Tiffany, however, avoided a cell. Her lawyer argued that she had no knowledge of the medication swap, and without audio of her explicitly agreeing to the murder plot, the conspiracy charges did not stick. But freedom is a relative term. The scandal destroyed her reputation. In the world of high-end real estate, trust is currency, and hers was bankrupt. She lost her license. The creditors descended like locusts, stripping the house, the cars, and the furniture. Last I heard, she was working double shifts at a diner on the outskirts of the city, serving lukewarm soup to strangers, just as she had once served to me. I do not wish her harm, but I do not lose sleep over her struggles. She is learning the value of $1, the hard way, a lesson I should have taught her 20 years ago. As for me, I left Chicago 3 days after the arrest. I packed 1 suitcase of new clothes and boarded a first-class flight to Los Angeles. When I landed, the air was different. It didn't bite. It embraced. The driver took me up the Pacific Coast Highway, and when we pulled into the driveway of the villa my brother Lucas had left me, I finally understood why he had stayed away for so long. The house was a sanctuary of glass and stone, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was vast and silent, but it was not empty. It was filled with the potential of a life I had yet to live. My days now are defined by a rhythm of peace. I wake up with the sun, not because I am cold or afraid, but because I don't want to miss the colors painting the sky. I walk down the private wooden stairs to the beach every morning. The sand is cool under my feet, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore acts like a balm for my spirit. With every tide that pulls back into the deep, I feel it taking another piece of the pain from Chicago with it. The memory of the storage room, the taste of the watery soup, the sound of the lock clicking shut. It is all fading, becoming as distant as a bad dream. I have stopped looking over my shoulder. I have also found that wealth opens doors, but it is character that invites people in. I joined a local chess club at the community center. I didn't tell them who I was or how much I was worth. To them, I am just Harrison, the guy who plays a wicked defense and tells terrible jokes. I made a friend named Harold, a retired Navy pilot. We sit on the terrace of the cafe playing for hours, arguing about strategy and politics. He likes me for my company, not for my checkbook. It is a feeling I haven't had in years, the feeling of being seen simply as a human being, but I did not keep all the money for myself. Lucas left me a legacy, and I intended to honor it. I established the Lucas Bennett Foundation. Our mission is simple. We provide legal aid and emergency housing for seniors who are being exploited by their families. Every time we help an old woman keep her home or help a grandfather reclaim his pension, I feel like I am having a conversation with the brother I lost. I am using his fortune to protect people like me, people who loved too much and trusted too blindly. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening, when the sun dips below the horizon and turns the ocean into liquid gold, I sit on my balcony with a glass of wine. I think about the choice I made that morning in the lawyer's office. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. To cut off your own child is to cut off a piece of your heart. There is a phantom pain there that might never go away completely. But then I take a deep breath of the salt air and I look at the life around me. I see the staff who treat me with genuine respect. I see the letters on my desk from the people the foundation has saved. I see the reflection in the glass door of a man who is healthy, strong, and dignified. I realized that I had to lose a fake family to find my true self. We are taught that blood is thicker than water, that we must endure abuse because of DNA. That is a lie. Family is not about whose blood runs in your veins, it is about who would bleed for you. It is about who holds your hand when you are sick, not who checks your insurance policy. It is about who brings you soup to nourish you, not to weaken you. I don't hate Tiffany. Hate takes too much energy, and I have none left to waste on her. I feel indifference. She made her choice, and I made mine. She chose greed, and I chose dignity. I am 70 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am not living for someone else. I am not building a house for a daughter who resents me. I am not paying debts for a son-in-law who mocks me. I am living for Harrison. The wind blows off the ocean, cooling my face. I take a sip of wine. It is good wine. It tastes like victory. My journey started with a betrayal that nearly killed me, but it ended with a rebirth I never expected. I stood up from the wheelchair of my own victimhood and walked into the light. And if an old construction worker from Chicago can do it, so can you. Never let anyone tell you that you are too old to start over. Never let anyone tell you that you are a burden. You are the architect of your own life, and it is never too late to fire the crew and build something new. Lesson learned from this story. The most painful truth we often have to accept is that the people who should love us the most are sometimes the ones who value us the least. Harrison's story teaches us that self-worth is not negotiable. We often cling to toxic relationships because of history or obligation, calling it loyalty when it is actually self-destruction. True dignity comes from having the courage to walk away from anyone who mistreats you, even if they are your own children. Being alone in peace is infinitely better than being surrounded by people who are waiting for you to die. Your life belongs to you, and you have the right to protect it fiercely. If this story made you cheer for Harrison, please hit that like button to show your support for every parent who has had to stand their ground. Share this video with your friends and family, because you never know who might be suffering in silence and needs to hear that there is a way out. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and redemption. I will see you in the next video. Stay strong and stay safe.